And and Julie, in your work at Lululemon and Away, you've always been focused on the community aspect of customer experience. And you and I have previously talked about the idea of brand and community before product, you know, sort of people buying into the idea of the brand before anything else. What does customer experience mean to you based on, you know, from your experience?
Yeah, so I spent the first decade of my career at Lululemon, and one of the most important things that we learned in onboarding is that before the product and the famous yoga pants were ever made, the passion and the interest in yoga was actually kind of the impetus for then the entire like athletic world to be opened up. So I think the most important thing that Lululemon did from the absolute get-go is have a really deep and consistent relationship with the practice of yoga. And so if you started with a really clear why we exist, what do we want to offer to people out in the world, then our product line came after that. And so as Lululemon has now been a company that has been growing and continued to be successful over 2 decades, it all traces back to the minute that the company was born, why it was born, why it's so important, what do we want to offer to the world. And so as a result, now run in other athletic endeavors, the just idea of movement and the principles and why movement is so important to the human development shines through in every single thing that the company has done.
Amazing. So on that, customer relationship, and spoken a lot about why it's important for brands to be human. Why is it so important to be authentic for brands?
I think at the end, authenticity really is about creating trust with your. They can trust in what you say, and in that what you say is going to be what you do. And I think that that sense of trust is so critical to any relationship, really. If you think about your own relationships in your life, those are really based on a foundation of trust. And it's no different with brands' relationships with their customers. And when you have that sense of trust with your customers, you can form resilient relationships with them. And that's really what I advise my clients to really think about and focus on, is building those resilient relationships. And what that means is that they are long lasting. So again, Josh talking about, lifetime value of a customer, that is really critically important. But they're also forgiving. And that is so important. When you have that relationship that is resilient with customers, they don't expect you to be perfect necessarily. They know that you will try to do right. And when you have moments where you don't, there's an understanding, particularly if you then try to make it right. And I think that those kinds of relationships really are driven by that trust, that authenticity of, this is who we are, this is how we are going to respond to you in situations where you're purchasing or not purchasing. As we've seen lately, many businesses have been shut down. And I think it has been critically important during this time that customers hear from you, even though you're not necessarily making money off of them. That's really important. And if you're not, they'll notice that, and that will affect how they think of you.
Chris, do you think in times like now, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. Do you think this is an opportunity to strengthen bonds with your community?
Absolutely. As I said, when you can show that you value your customers, even when they're not necessarily in a position to be buying from you, that sends an incredibly positive message that you value them, and that you'll be there when they're ready to or able to spend again. And so that has such an impression on your customers, and it really does lead to that ability to create strong, resilient relationships over time.
Drew, obviously, sticking with the pandemic, you know, a lot of brands have seen major challenges, and, you know, I'm sure managing that relationship with the customer throughout that has been challenging. What are the biggest challenges that you guys have faced at Bombas during this time? And you know, are there any major learnings that you've taken from it?
Yeah, so it's been difficult. The entire company, especially our CX team, has transitioned to working from home. So that comes with its own set of challenges that we all know here. And the truth is, it's been very important from the very beginning to keep a big portion of our team together. And not just because we try to have a good culture at Bombas, but the CX team is a communicative bunch because part of their job is to obviously advocate on behalf of the company to the customer and help them with whatever they need. But then it's to turn around and share those experiences with relevant stakeholders, whether it's product, merch, design, but also other CX members, because, you know, we need to know that if one person's having an issue, maybe somebody else is having the same issue. And so figuring out how to transition from that ideal in situ kind of situation where everybody is together, that came with its challenges. And of course, you know, it is isolating by design. Everybody is home in their places, and everybody's situation is different. And so, you know, especially with the way that we approach, and I think everyone here does agree on that approach, customer happiness, we have to make sure that our people are well taken care of and given space emotionally and psychologically to have a bad day. And so I think being able to give space to our agents to take time off and take a minute and unplug for a second, it really has been incredibly important because, you know, we're typically, as a relatively seasonal business around holiday, the way we like to say it is we spend 10 months planning and 2 months executing, even though of course CX happens all throughout the year. But you know, when quarantine first happened, you know, in early March, and everybody went home, there was much more uncertainty than there is even now, or I guess a different kind of uncertainty. And so there was a lot that was asked of our team. And so it felt like we were putting a lot of pressure on them, you know, in kind of a holiday sense, and that there was this drive and there was a lot of action and there was a lot of activity, but there was very little certainty. So we realized that was a lot, because it could just be like you're turning on a computer as an agent, plugging in like you're in the Matrix, turning off, turning on again, and it just, the queue is just nonstop. And so we, you know, we obviously don't want to Zoom people to death, but we do make sure that we create space. Like we do little things, like we have a standing 2 o'clock meeting that's optional for our team to come to, and we talk about anything but work. We'll play code names, or we'll talk about, you know, someone's haircut or whatever it is. And I think giving that space has been super important. And also, you know, truthfully, and especially in the beginning when we weren't sure where the business was headed, you know, we paused a lot of our, I call them like ball forward capital intensive initiatives. And that gave us time as managers to, you know, really focusing on making sure that the welfare checks that we were doing and checking in with folks were meaningful and they weren't rushed. So that gave us space to kind of work through some of the interpersonal issues that were unique to every single person working on our team. So yeah, it's been the most idiosyncratic and odd time. And, you know, we are very lucky in a lot of ways. And so we are just, we're just okay with saying we don't know, and we're okay with giving space.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible approach to take. And I think that, as you said, that the pressures on the team internally at this time is a hell of a lot, can often be underestimated. And obviously, you know, the pandemic has put a lot of pressure on different businesses. There's also been sort of cultural expectations that have been put on businesses, especially over the last 6 months, but even before then. You know, we've had a lot of cultural expectations from companies with, you know, with Black Lives Matter movement and diversity in the workplace and environmental issues, to name a few. And customers now expect brands to turn their values into actions. And what I sort of want to talk about, and Julie, I'd love to hear from you on this first, is should a sock brand or an activewear brand or a luggage brand be expected to be a spokesperson or a political activist or an advocate? I know obviously your former employer, Wade, for example, has been, there's been some sort of, I would say, take down pieces or, things that focus on them.
Heat.
Are brands being held to a higher standard? Is there a good reason for that?
I think it's an incredible question. And I think that as we look at the way brands have evolved in the past 10 years, the landscape of how brands interact with their customers have totally changed. Like, there is a dialogue that occurs now, given all of the various platforms that exist nowadays. And I think that there's probably varying degrees of opinions around this. And I know that both from being on the brand side and a consumer side, I am more likely to spend my money with a brand that I feel like values the same things I value. So if you are a brand that from the beginning, you have very clear brand values, I think that that is very important, and now has kind of come to the time where like those values have to meet the moment, where there is action that is expected to be, there is action that's required, at least from a customer's perspective, and I think from an employee perspective. So if the company is saying one of their main values is equal access, well, then now is the time where how do you actually demonstrate that? So we're providing equal access for everybody to participate in yoga, or for everybody to have the opportunity to travel or whatever, or to buy socks or whatever it is. So I think that it is important to see action from brands right now. And I do think that it is an incredible time for a brand to be really clear and vocal about the things that they care about and what they're actually doing about it. Because I do think, back to what we've been talking about, it will create an increased sense of loyalty and lifetime value. It's kind of like the defining moment right now, I think, for a lot of brands.
Drew, going back to you, with Bombas, always historically, at least that I've seen, been really excellent at sort of being an advocate for, or standing up for the values that you have. Can you talk to us about the last couple of months? Like, how have you responded to these values? And I guess more to the point, is there advice for brands navigating these, and how should they be responding?
Yeah, well, I think Julie said a lot of really great things, and I agree with all of them pretty much. Look, we're an apparel brand for sure, but we're also a company, and a company is made up of people, and we're beholden to one another. And so, of course, continuing our community-driven efforts in terms of giving has been something that we will continue to dig into. And so that is our external piece, and we're fortunate in that we have that mechanism to actually help. And it's not to say that it's too late for other brands and other companies to think about ways that they can interact with the community and not worry about being accused of virtue signaling, because if you're actually doing something, I don't see what the problem with that is. If you're at the table, that's great whenever you got here. But internally as well, I think focusing on our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts is something that we're really digging into. And so as the national and global conversation around race has gotten to the point where it is, we're seeing this as an opportunity to really look inward, to make sure that we are taking into account all opinions, and we are relying on people that are smarter than us at this to help out. And I think we're just being honest, and we're trying as best as we can. So I think internally and externally both are important things to think about. And just bringing it back to the topic of this discussion for customer experience, we place the highest premium on respect with within our agents to our customers, but also from our customers. And so we are quite happy to break up with a customer if we receive any sort of abusive, racist, homophobic, any sort of language, at all, that puts our people in, uncomfortable or unsafe places. And we've decided to happily do that. And unfortunately, it's happened a bit. But the truth is, the outpouring of support that we've received from some of our communications and from, some of the initiatives that we've undertaken and talked about that folks know about has vastly, drowned that out. But that's not to say we're not hyper focused on that as well. And it's important for us to make sure that all the people that we work with, feel comfortable and safe.
If I could just piggyback off that, Drew, because what you shared brought up, there was the chief people officer at Lululemon when I first started there. One of the things I wrote down in my notebook from onboarding was, when you take care of your people, they'll take care of your customers. And I've always come back to that. And I think what you shared in the example of kind of a zero tolerance policy for the customers, potentially saying something harmful to a CX associate, is an example how Bombas is taking care of their people, which are then taking care of their customers. And like, your people are your customers. They're like your most loyal customers. So I think it's often overlooked about the value and the importance that companies actually place on their own assets, which are their people, and also thinking of them as their most important customers. So I love that you shared that example.
Thanks.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in very quickly, I love both of your responses, Drew and Julie. And I think that this is, again, to bring it back to the sense of relationships with your customers. Living your values as a company is critically important to authenticity and to your customer's sense of trust. If a company says that they value equality but remains silent in the face of inequality and incidents that are really polarizing, then a customer has to question everything they say. Do you really believe that? Is that something I can trust you for? Can I trust anything you say? And that becomes a real challenge. And so I think that the ability to live your values as a company in small ways, local small ways, as well as broader, bigger, more global ways, is critically important.
Agreed completely. I mean, yes, feels like love and appreciation for both customers and employees here is a very key theme. I want to change it up a bit and talk about another sort of expectation that's been driven by the market, which is customer service, the service expectations, which, due to companies like Amazon, for example, people have become accustomed to a very high level of service in terms of delivery speeds and free returns and all that kind of stuff. And what I want to focus on is how do smaller brands keep up with the Amazons of the world? How do they behave like that? How do they manage those sorts of expectations? Chris, I know that this is something you're particularly passionate about. You have a background that I'd love to hear from you on that.
Sure. Thank you. So yes, this is something I feel very strongly about. I actually grew up in a small business. My family owns a furniture and boutique business, very creatively named Grays. And, it's one of the things that we've had many conversations about as a family and as business owners, is how do we compete with the Amazons or the Walmarts, Targets, large furniture, big box stores and all of that. And one of the things that I always go back to is, I'm loosely quoting The Art of War, where they say, don't attack your enemy where they're strongest, attack them where they're weakest. And you're not going to beat Amazon for convenience and fast shipping and low prices. I mean, it's very difficult for a small business to try to compete there. So I think it's important to look at what can you do that the Amazons of the world cannot do? And I think if we think about customer service beyond overnight shipping and convenience, we can look at personalization. We can look at creating warm, welcoming, inviting experiences that people want to return to. And so it is really important for small business owners to understand what the Amazons of the world do well and where they really have weaknesses or areas where customers are maybe less happy, that they can then step in and provide that.
And Drew, how do you guys, I mean, you were a scaling business once and still are. I mean, how do you guys keep up with the expectations that the Amazons set?
Yeah, I think Chris is right in that setting expectations is the most important thing, and authenticity is something that he's mentioned a few times, and that's something that we think about all the time. And so, like as he said, it's impossible to keep up with Amazon and be Amazon. So we don't try, right? We can only be Bombas. But one thing that Amazon has done, sure, the expectation for the general e-commerce end user has been, especially for fulfillment and shipping the next day, and we can't do that. But what it's done is it's allowed us to interact with customers who now, because of Amazon, because of how prevalent they are, especially during COVID, they are professional e-commerce end users, and so they are able to communicate their needs to us and their wants to us in a much clearer way than even when we started initially, when we started Bombas. And so I think because of that, we're able to, if we're not able to implement billion-dollar tech solutions, we're still able to listen and then goal toward certain things that we prioritize as far as what we think customers want in terms of their needs, sure, for shipping. So yes, we have focused on speeding up our shipping times. But one of the things that we have always been, I think, really good at, and this is something that helps us, stand up in a world where there are Amazons and there are giants, is communication. We're hyper proactive with our comms, and especially if it's an operational issue, like a fulfillment issue, and we're fast to get out ahead of it. And we see every single time, if we notice it first and reach out to customers proactively, their reactions are, it's great, no problem, thanks for letting us know, and they feel part of it, rather than them having to reach out because they're waiting, or our ship windows weren't where they should be. And so we communicate on site pre-purchase to make sure that they know what they're getting, when they're getting it, but then after that, if there are any issues, we settle high. And we call foul on ourselves quicker than anyone. But I think there's authenticity there, and I think when things like that happen, not that we do them on purpose, but we mess up a lot. And so how we react to that, and how we message around it, and how we settle with our customers and make it right, it does bring them in closer, and it gives a sense of ownership to the customer, and that they're on this journey with us, and it's not something that it's not actually a detriment in the end. While we do feel horribly if we miss something, they know that because we do whatever we need to do and whatever we can do to make it right.
And I want to talk, actually, Chris said something fantastic, but like a lot of our community and a lot of people here will be from smaller brands, from startups. They'll be founders themselves. And I want to talk about at the early stage of companies, you're able to do things that aren't so scalable. And Chris, I'm going to quote you here because I absolutely loved it. When we spoke previously, you talked to me about the unfair advantage that smaller brands have in being able to do these things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for quoting me on that. It's great. I want to answer this by also sort of piggybacking on what Drew said, because I really appreciate what he said about listening to your customer. And that's one thing I think that smaller companies it's easier for them to do that. Larger companies, it's more challenging. Doesn't mean they can't do it. It just definitely does take more effort and more intentionality about it. But that is one of the things that's critically important, because a customer needs you not just to be a good listener, but to demonstrate to them that you are a great listener. And you do that through the experiences that you provide. And small businesses can provide more meaningful, sometimes more meaningful responses to their customers. When you think about the brick and mortar stores, the small mom and pop stores, there's that sense of intimacy, of a relationship. They know you, you know them. And that creates a sense of belonging, a sense of recognition, and a lot of very positive emotional experiences that are part of these unfair advantages that small businesses have. And these form impressions and associations with the brand. And so, when small companies can do that and manage that, they really have some strong advantages there.
Yeah. Drew, you actually, I remember you telling me a story about the early days in Bombas, where you were much more nimble and able to sort of really react to issues that you had. Can you tell us any stories from those times?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I wouldn't say we were much more nimble. I still, the way I look at it is like, for, in terms of feedback, and in terms of reach, like our marketing team works much more in the macroeconomics, and the CX team works much more in the microeconomics, just in that there is power in anecdotal feedback. And so I think there were just less of us. So there are stories that happen all the time, but we would we missed shipping deadline and missed a shipping deadline for a woman that was headed out on vacation, and she wrote an email, and there was nothing we could do other than refund her, except we looked on a map, and she lived 100 miles away from our office, and it happened to be on the way out to my parents' house. So I said, all right, look, well, if you don't mind someone skulking around your garden at 2 a.m, I'm happy to come bring the socks. And I took the train out to my mom's house, and I dropped off a load of laundry, and then I borrowed her car, drove out, put the bag in her garden where it was, and we were able to do that. And we did it because we could. We did it because it was fun. We did it because we were that's who we wanted to be, and we were not necessarily like in a position to like think about the LTV implications of that at that point, because we just, our headspace wasn't there, I guess. But I didn't even know that she enjoyed it or even got it until 6 months later. Somebody was having a conversation at a coffee shop, 100 miles in the other direction about this exact situation. And this man told this woman the story, and the person who heard it fell off her chair because she happened to be the mother of 2 of the founders of our company. And so I think the way that we are trying to replicate that feeling as we grow is agent empowerment. And so to give people on the front lines the ability to make decisions and to use each interaction as an opportunity possibly to bring someone closer to our brand, I think that helps us replicate those earlier days. And it's something, could be something as simple as somebody putting a calendar alert to call someone who might be older and would call up every once in a while just for help, but then we realized maybe they just wanted someone to talk to. So it doesn't have to be something that's expensive or costs a lot of money. A simple phone call can help. But we do give that power to frontline agents. So there's no time I've got to talk to a manager and I've got to escalate this. And so not only does that free up time for managers, but it also means that the agent themselves, especially even if it's someone that we hire temporarily for holiday, they feel like they're speaking for the brand, and because they are, right? Like if somebody calls up, and especially if it's a new customer, the person who picks up the phone is the first human being they're interacting with your brand. And with everything we spend on customer acquisition and product and brand and everything, it now is down to this person. And so to make sure that those folks feel empowered to do those fun, strange moments of surprise and delight, we think it's the most important thing. And no matter what happens with the future of Bombas, we're going to try to make sure that we can still behave in that way and act like that.
Amazing. So we have about 10 minutes left before we get some questions. I want to finally talk about community. And Julie, I'm going to start with you here because, customer experience plays a big part in building a community. And I know that in the businesses that you've worked in, Lululemon especially, they really put community first. And I'd love to hear from you about how you think you go about building such a strong community, and especially, in the IRL world, in the physical space, which Lululemon did so well, how do you do that?
I think using Lululemon as an example, because I would argue that they're one of the companies that actually build community in a really authentic way the best, and have maintained or grown that even as the company has grown. And I think what I share isn't going to be like create an aha moment for anyone. It's like themes we've talked about in this conversation, but it all boils down to having a relationship, a one-to-one relationship with our guests or customers that come into our store, and allowing that to evolve. And truly caring about your people goes a really long way. And so there's that. And then there's also the listening and the asking questions and the being curious. What is it that our community really cares about? And then how do we actually show that we care about the same things that they care about? So I think if I boil it down to, if we go back to the start of Lululemon, it was very clear that it was a yoga brand, and it wanted to embody the principles and the values of yoga. So the first step was we hired those that believe that way, that live their life that way. So now as our customers or our guests are walking into our retail, our physical footprint, they get such a clear sense of what the brand is and what it stands for, because we are hiring the people that embody the same things that we believe in. And then from there, the customers and the relationship between the customers really grow. And Drew, as you were sharing that story, I think looking to the question previously of how does small brands go a long way when it comes to customer service, and still at Lululemon, I think it's fascinating to think about. There's over 350 stores. Every store has local ambassadors. It's never been a paid agreement or a contract. It's simply rooted in relationships, and that there are these community leaders that believe in the same things we believe in, that want to make their world and the communities a better place. Therefore, our store associates feel so empowered to recognize these people, build a relationship with these people, and then they let it grow. So I think it also allows our people to be really entrepreneurial within their four walls and look at the retail business as more than just a retail business, but rather a really significant place in the community for people to learn and grow with one another. And therefore bonds are created, and people want to buy Lululemon for everything and for years and years to come. And it's the small things, I think, that go a really long way, whether it's an ambassador who's opening up her spin studio, and she's excited and nervous and all the feelings that come with it, and the store team ends up taking turns to all go to that spin studio that day to say hi, drop her flowers, send a postcard. So I think it's the really incredible moments you can show up for people in their life once you know the things that they're interested about and care about, aside from just being a customer and buying a pair of pants. So never underestimate the value of a relationship, actually learning, understanding what motivates that person, what they're interested in, and being committed to following up and continuing that relationship for years to come.
Do you think there's a big impact in the sort of external perception based on the internal culture and values?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So I was sort of saying the internal culture and values of a business really reflect.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, what I would say is, with Lululemon in particular, what you see is what you get. So there's no like peeking behind the curtain and all of a sudden what everything that that company said they stand for, how they actually operate, treat one another, behave with one another is out of integrity. So I think that, you know, it all started with defining really clear values, defining the why of the company, and then going out and hiring people that are kind of like down with the way that they want to do things. And it is definitely, every company and every brand isn't for everybody. But it's being really thoughtful and patient in order to attract the right people that are ultimately going to be the people that are growing your brand for you.
Completely.
If I could just, one thing I would love to say about that, Julie, I've actually used Lululemon as a great example of community engagement for years and presentations, and so kudos to you. It's you've clearly done something really great there.
Thank you.
Chris, I was going to ask, you know, community can be a bit of a buzzword. How important is it for customers to feel like they belong to a brand community, do you think? Okay, is it important? Can it be overplayed?
I think, well, one thing I would say, I mean, there's a great quote, I can't remember who said it, but someone smarter than me who said, you know, people don't buy brands, they join them. And I think it's such a smart way to think about branding and how you bring your brand into the world and represent it. Can it be overplayed? I think it can be overplayed if it's not authentic, because, you know, every touch point to your customer demonstrates your values, whether they are the values you've actually spoken or they're not. They're ones that you're unintentionally putting out there that may or may not be something that people value. And I think unfortunately we've seen a very public example of where this hasn't worked out, and with the Ellen show and their mantra of be kind. And, you know, we've recently heard some really, you know, negative news about, you know, that the culture there. And I think that's really damaged that brand for a lot of people who saw it as really inspirational.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I could actually build off that, Chris, I think what you shared, the quote, I think it's similar to what you shared, but people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So when it goes back to like building your community, what I often was challenged with was like, well, how do you measure it? How do you know what's working? What's the ROI formula for it? And my pushback is I was like, we're evaluating the relationship that one feels, the closeness that they feel to our brand. So how do you actually want me to put a dollar amount onto it? Like, I wouldn't say the relationship with my mom is worth $1 million and the relationship with my grandma is worth $1.5 million. So why do we expect brands to do that with their customers? So I think the challenge is that it really has to have brands take a step back and just trust that when you do the right thing with the right people, everything is going to fall into place. And I can't necessarily give you how much and how, when that we're going to see these results. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, so going back to like the authenticity, because your mission is to allow everybody access to water or to allow everybody the opportunity to practice yoga, then that's all that you have, all that matters is that you're creating the space for your mission to actually come to life. And sales are a result of doing that really well.
Amazing. I love that. I think I'm going to end our conversation there because it felt like a really beautiful place to leave it. And I'm going to open up to some questions because there's some really great ones here. The first one I'm going to read out says, if you've lost business, you know, if we talk about trust, how and what could be a smart and honest way to win trust back? Does anyone want to, Drew, do you want to answer that one? I know you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, it's hard, obviously, but I think coming to terms with why you've lost that business and what the reasons are. So I think being you know, quite data driven is super important. But then on top of that, once you're able to then understand, if it's something obvious, then it's something obvious, then it's easy to address. But to be able to understand through data, like who the folks are and why and where they're, even if it's like on a site thing, if it's like abandoning a card or not, or bouncing. But I think settling high, I think communications are really important. And so anytime that we have had issues, and we've had some major ones where, there was something with our inventory management system and, people were getting the wrong things, or, maybe they were ordering things that weren't there. We were really honest about what happened, and we reached out to folks, and we, obviously we provided refunds and gift cards and, all the things that you would do. But we didn't know if they would ever come back, but we knew that it was the right thing to do. And so thankfully, in retrospect and in tracking these projects, people do come back. And so I think being honest, and like I mentioned before, calling foul on yourself as quickly as possible, and hopefully you notice it first, is something that's really important. And then also making sure that frontline agents, especially, who are hearing from people maybe who say, you've lost my business, making sure that they can quickly communicate that so we can, get into it and figure it out. So there's, we look at it in kind of two different buckets. If it's an individual or if it's a larger issue that stems from something operationally, I think the thread is that we want to be nimble enough to be able to address whatever it is, if possible, and then give somebody the opportunity to come back. So I think it's opportunity and just being willing to do, whatever it takes within our scope.
Great.
I just add to that. I think the importance of transparency really comes into play here as well. And Julie, you said, you're talking about Lululemon, that, what you see is what you get. I think the ability to acknowledge, we made a mistake. I mean, your story, Drew, about the woman who didn't get her socks before vacation, and I think it's tremendous, and it's a great example of, on a small scale, and you can do this on a large scale as well, is acknowledging the error, and making it very clear what steps you're going to take to repair that. And you can compare it to any relationship that you have in your life. Once trust has been broken, what needs to happen in order for that trust to be reestablished.
Yeah. Another question we have here is basically is advice for smaller brands, which is, what would you concentrate on if you have limited resources, certainly at the earlier stage of a business? What sort of customer experience should you be concentrating on? Would anyone like to take this for the early stage brands?
Well, I guess I can speak from just our perspective. So people ask us a lot, like, what's the one important thing for the brand in general? Whether, is it the product? Is it the mission? Is it the brand? Is it the service? And it's all of that, right? So it's like, you can spend all the money that you have on a Facebook ad, but if the product isn't good, then nobody's going to come back, and then everybody goes home. But if there may be an issue with the product and you don't have great people that are empowered to answer that and to make it right, then you're going to get a bad reputation, and then everyone's going to go home. And so, and then if you talk about if your brand has a community element to it, like ours happens to, if that's not real, and if we're not participating in it on an employee level and talking about that with authenticity, then I think that there's an issue there as well. And so I think just making sure that, especially with so many brands entering the D2C space, just generally, and then of course, during this pandemic, people can sniff out inauthentic brands pretty quickly. And so I think focusing on a great product, focusing on great service, focusing on the core values that you espouse both internally and externally are things that anybody should do and within their power. And they're all as important as one another.
Retweet everything you just said, Drew. And I would say also, like, not to underestimate the value of asking your customers questions. Like, what are you liking? What are you not liking? What's working for you? What's not working for you, in creating a feedback loop so that you can continually get better and deliver on your customers' needs month over month, year over year.
I absolutely love that and agree with it wholeheartedly, both of you actually. And one thing I would say to smaller brands is, you know, there's incredible power in curiosity, listening, observation. And one of the unfair advantages I think that small businesses have is that the key players from the business are often on the floor. They're often engaging with customers. And that is an incredible advantage, to have your finger on the pulse of what people like, what they're responding to, how they're responding to it. And I think that there's not necessarily a need to do like a huge segmentation study and huge, research studies for smaller brands. You can actually start with just observing, asking your associates what they're seeing day to day, asking your customers, and then mapping out some of the key touch points to your customers and making sure that those touch points are communicating your values, and finding those spots where there are points of pain or frustration and doing what you can to eliminate them.
Yeah. Chris, staying with you, actually, one of the questions was, in fact, does not having a very e-commerce based approach play, how does it play? Does it set a disadvantage? I think you're saying the opposite, really.
Not having e-commerce?
Well, it's less focused on e-commerce.
Yeah, it really depends on the positioning. I mean, I think it really starts there. There are brands with little or no e-commerce presence that are able to create really compelling, engaging experiences that draw people to them. It is, I mean, I think there are obviously advantages to having a strong e-commerce presence, but that doesn't mean that you can't thrive. It just means that you have to focus on drawing people to you and to your physical space. And that means creating really great experiences that people love. An example I love is like a TJ Maxx. Their positioning is being a treasure hunt. It is disorganized. It's not necessarily the cleanest place you've ever been. Stuff is thrown everywhere. And that doesn't really translate to e-commerce very well, but people are drawn to it and they love it because they can find those deals. And I think that's a really great example.
Great. Guys, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a lot of love, a lot of authenticity, a lot of agreeing with each other. And I think it sounds like if we can replicate that for our businesses, we're going to go a long way. So thank you guys so much for joining us. It was really, I think, amazing. By the looks of the questions, everyone really appreciated your time, as did I. And thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time. So,
all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.